Good evening. Welcome to MACRI Talks. My name is Sarah Zenaida Gould, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. Tonight, we are pleased to be joining a conversation led by Dr. Angela Valenzuela, along with Dr. Alberto Martinez and Dr. Emilio Zamora, who will be discussing the 2019 Hispanic Equity Report at the University of Texas at Austin, which found a wide range of disparities impacting Latino faculty at Texas's flagship state university. So we're going to learn more about that study tonight from our guests, but first let me just tell you a little bit about our speakers. Dr. Angela Valenzuela is a professor in both the Cultural Studies in Education program within the Department of Curriculum and Instruction and the Educational Policy and Planning program within the Department of Education Leadership and Policy at the University of Texas at Austin, where she also serves as the director of the Texas Center for Education Policy. She's the author of award-winning Subtractive Schooling, U.S. Mexican Youth and the Politics of Caring, Leaving Children Behind, How Texas-Style Accountability Fails Latino Youth, and Growing Critically Conscious Teachers, a social justice curriculum for educators of Latino youth. She also founded and operates an education blog called Educational Equity, Politics, and Policy in Texas. Next up, we have Dr. Alberto Martinez, a professor in the Department of History at the University of Texas at Austin, where he has worked for 17 years. He's the chair of the Independent Equity Committee, and he's a fellow of the American Physical Society. Dr. Martinez is the lead author of the Hispanic Equity Report from 2019, as well as the author of several books, including Science Secrets, The Truth About Darwin's Finches, Einstein's Wife, and Other Myths. He also writes articles for newspapers and magazines, including the Austin American Statesman, The Hill, Salon, Medium, and USA Today, Scientific American, and the Daily Texan. He was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And finally, Dr. Emilio Zamora is the Clyde Rabb Littlefield Chair in Texas History at the University of Texas at Austin, and an affiliate with the Center for Mexican American Studies and the Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies, also at UT Austin. He is a co-editor, along with Andres Tijerina, and co-author, along with Dr. Tijerina, Amy Porter, Guadalupe San Miguel, and Sonia Hernandez, some of whom you've seen here on previous MACRI Talks, of a forthcoming textbook on Mexican-American history in Texas. So welcome, esteemed scholars from UT Austin, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Valenzuela.
Thank you, MACRI and Sara. Thank you so much for organizing this. We are really appreciative of this opportunity to revisit the 2019 Latino equity complaint against the University of Texas at Austin. We use Hispanic and Latino interchangeably. It's the Latino education equity complaint. And so here we are in 2022, right? That was 2019. Here we are in 2022. A lot has happened since then. And it's an ongoing struggle. It continues. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think this will be a really interesting panel to learn what the updates are and also how it's really important in struggle to be evidence-based, right? The importance of evidence, and that's what we will be presenting to you today. Now that our speakers have been introduced, I'll just acquaint you a tiny bit about the Independent Equity Committee wrote the Latino Equity Report at the University of Texas at Austin. And two of them are here, Dr. Emilio Zamora and Dr. Alberto Martinez, who also chairs the committee. Other committee members, there's 6 more, total of 8, are Dr. Jorge Canizares Erzguerra, Gloria Gonzalez Lopez, Francisco Gonzalez Lima, Marta Menchaca, Fred Valdez Jr., and John Moran Gonzalez. An important storyline to this conversation is that it matters to stand up to injustice. It makes a difference in the world. Sometimes we think it won't make a difference. I'm just one person, but it's really clear that when people come together, when they organize and they become methodical and thoughtful in addressing questions of inequity, just for starters, I mean, how all of this kind of got kicked off in the public domain was, frankly, with a chorizo and menudo breakfast here in Austin, held by National LULAC President Domingo Garcia. And at that breakfast, I think it was in 2020, they were compelled as a result of hearing from Dr. Alberto Martinez speak on the inequities at the University of Texas in higher education to establish a standing committee. And now I chair the National LULAC Standing Committee on Higher Education, co-chair with Dr. Teresa Montaño in California, and Dr. Emilio Zamora is a member of that committee, along with 17 others who represent states and numerous universities throughout the country. The report is and remains a monumental achievement that is enjoying, observing, witnessing ripple effects across the country, primarily because I believe it not only provides a cogent method and structure for understanding Hispanic higher education equity, addressing faculty, staff, and students, but also because of the type of template that it creates so that other institutions can take it up and look at the template and apply it to their own respective institution. So that's a real achievement of this report. And I am aware that Clear Lake, University of Houston Clear Lake, and Texas A&M Kingsville are among the universities here in Texas for whom this report has become actionable. Another thing important to mention is that whereas the issues that are addressed in the report address representation of Latinos in higher education, as well as pay equity, this is a civil rights as well as a labor rights issue. All our presenters will touch on this, and without further ado, Dr. Emilio Zamora.
Thank you very much, Angela. And thank you all for showing up and giving us a bit of your time. We are here basically to revisit a report that full professors of Latino origin produced a couple of years ago that demonstrated that Latino full professors in particular were underpaid, despite the fact that they have been we were producing at a very high level, producing what we usually produce at the university as a research institution like UT Austin as faculty members. We're talking about books and articles and also other areas of evaluation. We are doing as much and more than most people at the university, but on the average, we found that we were getting paid lower than them. That is the underlying argument that we make. We'll talk more about that, as well as some things that have resulted from that important report later. What I want to do at this point is to say something as a historian of Mexican origin people in the United States. And what I have to say about them as a minoritized community, to a great extent, speaks to the experiences of other minoritized communities. And this is what the point that I want to make. Education has always been a central concern in our history, primarily because education is the avenue through which we can advance as a community, as families, and as individuals. Right next to education, employment has been an important issue in our history. Obviously, where we work and how much we earn determines the quality of life that we provide for our families. So, education and employment right underneath it are very important. What we have done in this report is address an employment experience, more specifically, the issue of pay equity, as well as representation in important administrative positions at institutions of higher learning as Latino scholars. So we're speaking about something that is very central to our experience as Latinos generally, but as Mexican Americans in particular, at a major institution like UT Austin. As Angela indicated, other people have seconded our claim. That is, they've taken our method of analysis, they've looked at employment data and pay data, and they're beginning to find that the problem we found is generalizable. That is, it's evident in other places as well. So our study is historically important, but it also has significant contemporary value. Let me just speak in personal terms. Um, when we this report, well, the report is a result of initial conversations in the history department at UT Austin between Alberto Martinez, Jorge, another colleague that was mentioned earlier, Jorge Cañizares Esguerra, and myself. And we did what most Latino women and others do occasionally. You sit down and you talk and you share notes and you discover that you have shared experiences. Sometimes those shared experiences are not very happy experiences. So we discovered in our conversation that all three of us were having similar experiences that I've already referred to. Experiences having to do with inequities or unfairness in the way they were paying us and valuing us. Let me just give you my example in our department, in the history department, where we began to ask these research questions. I was in a department with 57 tenure and tenure track professors. I was ranked number 33 in compensation, although I was number 12 in productivity. That is, only 11 other people were producing slightly more in the way of books and articles than me, though I was very far down the line uh, in getting pay equity. I was number 33. That's a major gap. I knew that this was happening thanks to the analysis of Alberto primarily. I was able to see in very stark quantitative terms the gap. The gap can be translated, and we've done these kinds of studies before that we title The Cost of Being a Mexican Worker. And what we do in that instance is what we did then. Basically, we not only determine the gap in pay, but we also, in our own minds, translated that in terms of things that we could not afford to buy or to experience because we didn't have that money. One of the things that I need to say, add to this, and it's also a very personal view of things. You may think, well, you folks at the university are earning pay that is above the average that most Mexican American or Latino workers receive. That may be true. That's not always the case, but generally speaking, that may be true. But I want to tell you that, I can live comfortably in the pay that I was getting, which was lower than other people similarly situated in my department in college and university. But that is not the issue. The issue is that my colleagues, again, that were similarly situated, were getting paid much more than me. So I was paid uh, disproportionately I was not paid in a way that reflected my position relative to other people. It's the difference in pay that is an issue here. The other thing that is important that I need to note is that when we submitted this report to the administration in the form of a complaint, we weren't just thinking about how we were being denied our rights. We were thinking, as many people before us have thought, that we are creating a better environment for people that are to follow us. These kinds of actions, the kind that we took, are meant to create changes in university settings so that young faculty that is coming in at this moment in our universities and colleges can be guaranteed that meritocracy will work for them, that they will be evaluated fairly according to the standards and the criteria established to be applied to everybody fairly and evenly. We are trying to perfect the union, in effect, when we do these kinds of things. And these kinds of things, these complaints are part, obviously, of a larger cause for equal rights, for equal representation in our institutions. We see this report as part of that legacy that we have, or part of our contribution to the legacy intended to create a fairer, a better America for all that live here, regardless of ethnic background or gender identity or sexual orientation. We in this country have foundational documents like the Constitution, through the 14th Amendment, for example, that guarantees us equal rights under the law, under the rules and regulations set up by institutions like UT Austin that we call meritocracy. I'll pass it along to Alberto, and Angela and I will be coming back with additional comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Martinez. Can't hear you.
All right, there we go. Thank you so much, Sara Zenaida, for having us as guests, and thanks to Angela and Emilio for starting us out. I'm Alberto Martinez. I began working at UT Austin in 2005. I met Emilio Zamora back then, and multiple of other colleagues. We labored very hard at UT for over a decade. And it was only in 2018 that those of us who are Hispanic professors in the Department of History decided to get together to talk about several problems we were experiencing. One of them was that it was seemingly difficult or impossible to get appointed to positions of leadership in our department. In other words, we started to get the sense that positions such as chair of the department, or the associate chair, or the director of the institute, or the chair of the salaries committee, etc., that these positions were always only held by white colleagues. And it wasn't just that they're positions of leadership, but also that these were the positions that involved, for example, automatic annual raises, course releases, sometimes summer salary supplements, etc. So we compared notes, and first we made a statement within the department, and eventually that led me and some colleagues to do an analysis of inclusion and diversity within the department. And eventually it led to an analysis of what was going on university-wide. So let me give you some images about the issues that we found. So here we go, revisiting the 2019 Latino equity complaint. The things that happened in the history department in 2018 and 2019 led to a public university report that Emilio, myself, and 6 other colleagues authored and released in October of 2019. That's the complaint that we are referring to, a complaint that formally alerted the university of issues of discrimination and marginalization, as we wrote, that were affecting Hispanics. It generated a lot of public attention. Here's an example of some of the prominent news coverage. I've highlighted in red a couple of entries. Soon enough, the main newspaper of the city of Austin issued an article actually in which the editorial board endorsed our reports and our concerns and begged the University of Texas to promptly carry out some sort of action to improve the working conditions of Hispanic professors. Similarly, months later, the Houston Chronicle, as you can see at the bottom of this list, issued another statement by the editorial board, again, begging the University of Texas at Austin to improve the working conditions of professors like Emilio and I and Angela, and beginning with salary equality. Here's another article also in the Houston Chronicle. This one happened a month earlier. In other words, the Hispanic Equity Report had come out 3 months previously, and even 3 months later, we were still front page news at the bottom of the page here, talking about the salary problems at UT Austin affecting us. So one example, this is where Emilio and I work. This is Garrison Hall. Department of History is housed in this building. It has been at the university for over a century. And when I did an analysis first of 15 years and then of 17 years, that is using all the available data, because sadly, the data becomes lost, misplaced. The history department doesn't keep data of its history. When I analyzed the data, this is what the patterns of lack of inclusion looked like. In other words, every year, without fail, the chair of the history department was a white person. The vice chair, or so-called associate chair, was also a white person. The director of the Institute of Historical Studies, also white. The chair of the Salaries Committee, always a white person, even to this day. The graduate advisor, also only a white person, and so on and so forth. And again, what mattered about these particular positions is that they were the positions that entailed these structural, not just leadership abilities, but also automatic annual raises and also the ability not to teach 1 or 2 courses or even 3 courses in order to carry these out. Now, we turned to see what was going on in other departments. And here, for example, you have the Department of Psychology, which has existed at UT Austin for nearly a century. And when we analyzed the history of every chair in 90 years of the Department of Psychology, it was always a white person. It was so absurd in some instances. Here's a really shocking example that showed up in the Houston Chronicle. The director of the Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies, without fail, for 79 or 80 years, was always a white person. Now, to us, this was shocking because, of course, if we had a Center for African American History, the assumption would be that at some point, or maybe even most years, the director will be an African American person, but not so with Latin American studies at UT Austin. So when we looked at the actual numbers for compensation, here you have examples of what we found. If we looked, for example, at total compensation, that is not just base salary, but also other supplements or endowments that are assigned to faculty, then the difference between Hispanic and non-Hispanic white professors was in the neighborhood of $25,000. If we considered instead salary alone, then there was still a very large difference in excess of $15,000. And again, if we remove the units, such as the School of Social Work or the School of Education, where the deans were Hispanic, the very few units, if we remove those, then we would find again a number in the neighborhood of $20,000 pay difference. Now, if you're a non-Hispanic white person and you hear these numbers, the sad reflex amongst some people is to think this must be wrong, because it just sounds implausible. So because we knew that we would not be believed because we are in fact Hispanic, we included all the data. That is, we included in the report the actual salaries of every single professor that we were referring to in these group analyses: white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, 2 or more ethnicities. We include the name and salary or total compensation of every single person, so that, of course, since we have no credibility because we're Hispanic and we are traditionally excluded from anything having to do with the decision-making process, we had to give the data. We found out the sad reality, which is that when you give the data, administrators feel no obligation to believe it. So instead, the regular answer that we got from administrators is that they have other data that is different from our data. Now, mind you, our data was just the data that the university had published, either in their own public budget documents and or the salary reports that the university officially provided to the Texas Tribune newspaper because of open records requests. But inevitably, if you analyze UT's own data and you try to come up with some conclusions, there were administrators that said, you've got wrong data, that's not the data we have, we've got different numbers. But invariably, no matter how many times we asked, the process of getting the alleged data would always be postponed. Requests were not followed through. One day, finally, when I filed an open records request, I got some data, but it was terribly incomplete, so it was unusable. I mean, people I knew were not in it, including myself. So it's very sad and it's very frustrating. But that's what we figured out that we have to work with. Give me 1 second to add a few slides. Here we go. Yeah, there's a limit on how many slides we can have on this system. Now, here's a different table. When we looked at the university's own data that was provided to the Texas Tribune, we found not just that full professors like myself, Emilio, Angela, were underpaid, but also that staff were also the lowest paid by race of ethnicity if they were Hispanic. These were enormous differences. Now, again, if you are a non-Hispanic white person, the immediate reflex is to think they must be wrong, because UT Austin has public statements that it's an equal opportunity employer and that it does not discriminate. And it's a sad thing about the United States of America that many institutions and corporations think that they can achieve equity and equal opportunity simply by writing a sentence in a website. And but then when you analyze, has there ever been, for example, a non-white president at our university? 137 years or something that our university has existed. Has there ever been a non-white person? Of course not. Were non-white or persons of color invited to apply to the job of president 2 years ago? There was no application process. Provost, the second highest position at our university, has there ever been a person of color or a Hispanic person in the role of provost/executive vice president at our university? Of course not. And you can go down the list. Multiple other positions, with some exceptions, have never been appointed to, Hispanic, persons of color, etc., despite achievements, merit. So let me say a word about that. Again, what we found is that people are skeptical. So if you say that you're underpaid, they imagine, well, it's probably for a reason. They'll naturally imagine that the reason Hispanic faculty are underpaid is because they were only recently admitted into academia and their achievements are fewer. So we did what administrators, deans, and the like don't want to do. We actually looked at every single resume of every professor, every full professor in four large departments: anthropology, sociology, history, psychology. And we analyzed the productivity. Nobody does this. Nobody cares. It's just astonishing. There's a culture of indifference nationwide. Imagine professors normally have a CV that might take something like 20 or 40 pages. Who wants to analyze 50 resumes, curriculum vitae of 40 pages? Who can compare that? So we actually did it. And this is what we found. We found that in the category of full professors, Black professors were paid very slightly more than white professors when we factor in productivity and years in rank and departments. When we factor that into the statistical analysis, Asian faculty are paid similarly as white, but then the amount that is paid to Hispanic professors is so low that there's a statistically significant difference between them and what white professors are being paid. In other words, we found that in a Research One university, what is most distinctive of faculty is how much scholarly material have you produced? How successful are you in your field? And this is measured by peer-reviewed scholarly publications and other measures of impact. And when we compared the productivity of the Hispanic professors with the non-Hispanic professors, what we found is there's a direct correlation between the productivity of Asian, Black, and white professors with their salary, as there should be. There's a direct correlation. The more you publish, the more you earn. Even salaries within departments like mine involve raises based precisely on this productivity. But when you compare the productivity of Hispanic faculty and their salaries, then we found no correlation. In other words, you can publish a lot, work a lot, really hard. It doesn't mean that you're going to be paid as much as somebody who has, say, half as many publications as you do. That's just the way it is. And naturally, people were annoyed by this. They thought we must have done something wrong. And there were other people who were very impressed, who were moved, who were very sympathetic, including the provost of our university, Maury McInnes, and several deans and other individuals like Vice Provost for Diversity and Community Engagement, Ted Gordon. There were several people that did care about this. What happened, however, is that then the initiatives they began, for example, the provost allocated $3 million for equity raises, which would have more than solved not just any inequities affecting Hispanic faculty, but all other faculty at the university. These initiatives were then aborted when both President Fenves and Provost McInnes left our university. So in 2020, just as COVID was beginning, they both got outside jobs and left UT. And they moved to other universities. So suddenly an interim president and interim provost were appointed, and we were left with this abandoned problem. And we formally informed the new president of the problem in August of 2020. And we gave notice in that formal letter about how we expected. We hope to get some reply within 3 months, anything, meeting, anything. Otherwise, we would understand that administrative solutions had been exhausted. So before I go in that direction, let me just show you a couple more of these slides, these issues that I was outlining. One of them was the retention of Hispanic assistant professors. Gave a terrible number. 60% of them leave our university. In other words, our university makes efforts to hire diverse people, but when they hire Hispanic faculty, assistant professors, most of them leave. Most of them do not get tenure. They either get a better offer at another university and they're paid better, or they try to get tenure, they fail, and they go away. That was just terrible. When we're talking about a 9-year period there. Here's another one. The university has not only departments like the Department of History, but also has centers and institutes. But even though almost 40% of the population in our state of Texas is Hispanic, less than 4% of the directors of these institutes and centers, less than 4% were Hispanic. Let me see. For example, imagine the College of Engineering at our university, the School of Engineering. Imagine how many branches of engineering there are, from civil engineering, computer engineering. No center, no institute of engineering had any Hispanic. Now, there are amazing Hispanic professors of engineering, but none of them would get these opportunities. Medicine, the Dell School of Medicine, the School of Natural Sciences, the School of Business, the School of Architecture, the School of Law, Public Affairs, Information, Communication, no center or institute in any of those branches had any director that's Hispanic. Again, completely just shocking to us. And take this example. The state of Texas in 2019 had roughly 5.5 million Hispanic women. Not a single Hispanic woman at UT Austin was a dean, a vice dean, an associate dean, or an assistant dean of anything. We're talking about 130 positions of leadership: dean of a school, assistant dean of diversity, associate dean of this or of that, all kinds of these top administrative, mostly academic positions. Not a single one was a Hispanic woman as of January 2019. So needless to say, these are parts of the reasons why this was a frustrating and difficult issue. So going back to what I was saying, in 2020, we informed the new president, the new provost, and we wait week after week, month after month. And what they did is they just didn't reply. They didn't reply at all. So in fall 2020, 8 full professors who are Hispanic, including myself, Emilio, and several others, that is 2 in history, 2 professors in sociology, 2 professors in anthropology, 2 professors in psychology, and 1 professor in engineering, we all filed formal complaints of pay discrimination at the EEOC and the U.S. Department of Labor. Ever since then, for almost 2 years, the U.S. Department of Labor has been investigating UT and analyzing compensation for Hispanic faculty to see if they can intervene or convince UT to solve these problems. In the meantime, another important development happened, which is that Hispanic staff at UT were alarmed by the Hispanic Equity Report, which is about professors. So the Hispanic Faculty and Staff Association created their own Equity Committee, and they carried out a statistical analysis, meticulously compiled, analyzing 21 job categories of staff at UT Austin. And what they found, just as of, say, December 2021, was that in every one of those 21 staff categories, the Hispanic people were underpaid in the neighborhood of 9 or 10%. So again, they found for staff something comparable to what we had found. We have found a difference of, say, roughly 12% affecting Hispanic full professors. So when you take full professors, you combine it with the staff, we're talking about 22 different job categories of employment at the university, all of them not just showing a pay disparity, but strong enough that Hispanic Staff and Faculty Association committee that created this report, a committee of which I was not a member, concluded in their actual written report that these are patterns of discrimination. And they gave the report to the university administration. To this day, as far as I know, they haven't solved these problems, but there they are. So we have the report, we have the Department of Labor complaints of discrimination, and we have the report by the UT staff. To wrap it up and open it up for more discussion from Angela, Emilio, Sarah, and any of you who are joining us, let me just say this is it's very difficult to carry out this kind of work. It's psychologically exhausting. At the same time, you do see results. The salaries of both myself and Emilio have increased over the past 4 years in the neighborhood of, say, 40 to 50% increase in our total salaries. It's astonishing that even after we have received raises in the amount of roughly 50% of what we used to make, we're still not even at the average payment of full professors within our department. It's just one of those things. So, but the difference is visible. Similarly, we've seen the chair of faculty council last year was chosen a Hispanic woman, Domino Perez. We were very glad because traditionally not many Hispanics have been in faculty council. And similarly, now a few deans, assistant deans, or associate deans are Hispanic. That's progress too. And meaning female Hispanics have finally given some opportunity. And I'll give you a couple more examples by way of progress, because of course it'd be nice to leave you feeling that there are silver linings. One does make little progress. The university has begun some internal, highly secretive review process for equity raises, which they don't use the word equity, but I saw the beginning of that process, and they used the word equity back then. They're just not calling it that now, but they're making some university-wide investment that the president calls the largest that they've made in salaries in a while. I think it's no coincidence. And just one more thing. Let me just think. For example, there's certain little things have happened. For example, now there's this Voces oral history project. For years, Maggie Rivas Rodriguez had been asking her dean to please allocate funding to create a center for this. And finally, he told her that he saw, because of the Hispanic Equity Report, he decided it had to be done, so they did it. I'll leave it there, but we can take it in more directions now as we move on. Thank you all.
Thank you. Wow, that was very, very powerful. And I don't even know where to begin other than to also add that it is very, very consequential in all of the ways that you discuss. But I think what we have to consider is that we are researchers at tier 1 flagship institutions. And if we are underrepresented, that means that the studies, the research, the mentoring, a lot of things are not going to happen because we are not present. Research time and again demonstrates that the way to increase your numbers and the interest of students who are Hispanic at higher ed institutions, you won't do it without faculty. You're not going to get there without faculty. So a 60% departure rate is astonishing. And on that note, I mean, it's I think really cool and interesting right now that National LULAC is considering a study that would be of a kind that's never been done, to that point of stuff not getting done because we're not there. And this would be a study of 5 to 6 states, California, Texas, Illinois, New York, Mexico, Florida, and New York, that will identify and analyze 10 years of data that will look at our systems of higher education in these states, producing demographic profiles at Tier 1, Tier 2, HSI, Hispanic Serving Institutions, across an array of variables, looking at faculty, composition, hiring, retention, opportunities for promotion, Latino student success, college readiness, persistence, community college transfer, access and success, and so on, and staff as well. And so, I mean, I think it's just to underscore, what Emilio, you were saying earlier. I mean, this isn't just, because, we want more pay, although more pay and equity is a great, an important thing to do in a meritocracy, but it is of enormous consequence to our communities to not be present.
I'd like to add something that I think some of our viewers may be asking themselves. Hasn't the university responded in a constructive, positive way? Alberto has already touched on that. There have been some results. The administration has responded to some extent with new hires, the unprecedented number of hires in my mind, raises and appointments of different kinds. But I would argue that they're not enough, as Alberto suggested. We're still not at parity. And when the university decided to do these things to correct the problem, there's two conclusions that have to be drawn. Number one is I know of no public statistical report analysis that they produce to justify some of these important changes, suggesting that they've depended on our analysis, despite the fact that they denied it all the way through and denied our request for new data to further affirm what we have found. They did not produce a new statistical analysis to justify what they were doing. Consequently, we have to conclude that much of what they have done has been based on the pressure that has been brought upon them by this report. So you have to ask yourself, is there a coincidence in the appearance of a report and some changes in the way they treat Hispanics at the university? It's not a coincidence. To drive the point further, my argument is that the report is largely responsible for encouraging the university to live up to the value of meritocracy. So on the one hand, we have to applaud them for some meager, for what I believe to be a meager response, but also understand that this is not a coincidence. And I want to add to that the following. As I said earlier, these efforts to create a better world for all of us, especially for those that follow us, is part of our history, to the extent that I could argue that it's probably one of the most important components in our culture. The will to respond the way we have to ensure equity and equality is very much a part of our culture. We've been doing it for so long. And despite that, I am bothered that we have not been recognized for the contribution that we made, which is a very important lesson for all of us. What we do is not for personal aggrandizement. What we do is not for pay. What we do is for the future of our communities, not only our own communities, but women generally, the working class as a whole. We have always said when a cause is righteous and just, it is fair to everyone. Everybody benefits. What we've done is that we've encouraged the university to live up to its ideals. And though we have not received any credit from the university, we're comfortable knowing that we contributed to this change. And this history, as far as I'm concerned, will tell that story. Um, Anybody else wants to say something?
Yeah, let me chime in. First of all, I did want to comment. I'm glad that Velma Vela Ibarra noted that our work was read and appreciated at Sol Ross University System, where we hope that somehow it can be helpful there. There's a Facebook user who asked us a question, which is, how does this affect, say, the report? Did it pertain or discuss the issue of fully funded PhD students? The answer is no. At some level, it basically doesn't, because the 2019 report was about faculty. The 2021 report was about staff. At some point, there should be some such report about graduate students. What's often not appreciated is that graduate students are adults and they are employees. In most cases, they're employees of the university who are miserably paid, who are led to lead a monastic life, where even I've had graduate students that tell me that they're at a supermarket and they can't buy apples because apples are too expensive. They cannot park near the university because parking is too expensive. I mean, the work conditions under which graduate students have labored for numerous years are shocking, shameful, are absurd, and unwarranted because of what is an enormously rich system of universities known as UT. I mean, UT is, say, the second richest university in the United States and probably in the world. And what happens instead? It's very difficult for the Board of Regents to get together and simply write a sentence that authorizes money, oil money, that otherwise just sits in investment banks, to actually write a sentence authorizing expenditures. And UT Austin students have been begging graduate students for raises for years. They've gotten nominal raises, they've gotten some worsening healthcare. But regarding Hispanic graduate students in particular, we know of multiple individual, what would be dismissed as anecdotal, but multiple individual incidents of Hispanic students having to keep their mouths shut, Hispanic students complaining that they are being treated unequally, Hispanic students saying that they are discriminated because English is their second language, so it is misconstrued as a sign of lack of intelligence. I mean, so there are serious issues that have to be worked out at some point. Let me actually read these comments that we're getting. A Facebook user, PhD student, getting paid $18,000 a year, not a living wage for sure, in the city of Austin. Imagine $18,000. That should go away only in rent. And this person is expected to work to live on that, working 20 to 30 hours a week plus activism. So it's really sad and frustrating. So yeah, I appreciate. I think these. Let me put it to this way. Facebook user. This is Maria del Carmen. Let me say this. Precisely because Hispanic professors like Emilio and Angela, who have dedicated roughly 20 years of their life to this institution, are not promoted to positions of leadership. Precisely because of that situation, they can't help. In other words, other professors of other races and ethnicity, they get given jobs. Hey, why don't you chair this committee? Why don't you, be dean of that and be dean of this? And we are left out of any discussions having to do with money and the management of money at this university. And because of that, we've been knocking on that door to try to, if we could, you know, get some sort of opportunity, then I don't know, maybe we would even waive our raises just to be able to help a little bit in your situations.
I should add that we've had some very distinguished scholars of Latino origin that have come through this university. And every single one of them that I've looked into, cases that I've looked into, were underpaid. These are people that are big names that we now tout as the dean of Chicano studies, for example, Paredes, Hinojosa Smith, Carlos Castañeda, and so forth. They were underpaid. So this goes back a long way to tell me that now all of a sudden some being from heaven touched the heads of administrators and softened their hearts just out of the blue is being very, I think, deceiving. It's the report, it's the pressure that we place. Let me give you an example of another senior professor that is an extreme case that is involved in the complaint with the Labor Department. This man, and this person, I'm not going to mention his name, was an extraordinary scholar. He made a name for himself in the 50s and 60s. He just recently retired, and he was getting paid. His colleagues were getting paid 2 and 3 times more than him. And he had a pretty significant portfolio of publications. And he complained, and the complaint went nowhere. So the university has had ample opportunities for a very long time to address this problem and to correct it. What a coincidence that they're doing it now, suggesting that we cannot let up in places where we work, places where we shop. We need to always be sensitive to these kinds of problems and assume our social responsibility to join with others and change things, if not for ourselves, for people that are coming after us.
Yeah, let me jump in there. I'm still reflecting on this question about the graduate students. The first one said, "How do you see them being impacted by this work?" I'll give you an immediate example of the impact. By reading the Hispanic Equity Report, a number of graduate students who I know who are Hispanic became aware of the problem. They didn't know that there was this problem that not only are multiple professors in many departments experiencing. For example, you raise your hand at a department meeting, you say what you think, but nobody cares. Your feedback is ignored. And nobody even replies saying, "Good point, I think we should do it." Nobody says that. So what I'm saying is, when they become aware that there is this, it's like becoming aware there are these professional obstacles that are still in your path and that you're going to have to negotiate and that you're going to have to work around. Because it took me, I had been in Austin. I'm from Puerto Rico. I grew up in Puerto Rico until I was 22, and then I moved to the States. But I had been in Austin for more than 10 years before I realized that that I was perceived and treated as a foreign person. It didn't occur to me. I was born a U.S. citizen. I grew up in Puerto Rico. It didn't occur to me that the kind of treatment I was getting was equivalent to that of some foreign people. In other words, Emilio, who is from Texas and whose family, are the longtime, historical inhabitants of these lands, would tell me again and again, "I don't know what's going on here." He said, "I don't get invited to coffee. People go out to coffee and they never invite me." That kind of thing. That, imagine that the Chinese person arrives in the United States and people understand that this person has difficulty speaking English, and for that reason they feel awkward about it, so they don't interact with the person much and tend to leave them alone, as happens in, say, engineering departments. And we were being treated that way. It was astonishing to finally grasp that. And I became a foreigner. I'm happy to be a foreigner. I've accepted it. I'm a foreigner, but I just wasn't aware that this was happening. So let's see. We have a couple of more comments here. Jorge Haynes, who we know and appreciate. No coincidence. Hi, Jorge. No coincidence. They just refuse to give you all credit for the shining of light on these inequities. Yeah, in my department, one of my colleagues, Virginia Garrard, the director of the LILAS, Institute of Latin American Studies, when we first did the internal department study, she replied that the report shines a lot of light in some dark places, and that she really appreciated it. So it's important to shine light on this. Some of us get burned in the process, but as Emilio said, we open the path for other people. In other words, we've discovered, I mean, after 10, 15 years, you discover you're just not going to get certain positions. You're just never going to happen. And then you say, well, but if we make a little noise, other people, and we've seen it happen. We've seen say another professor arrives, Monica Munoz, she arrives from another university, and they immediately start offering her, do this, do that. They put her in all the committees that they would never put Emilio, myself, or Jorge. They just instantly give it. Oh, here's a Hispanic, we can give it to her. And it's wonderful to see it happen. And, in the long run, there are all these painful moments, but the good thing is to see some progress, even if it doesn't maybe get to us. That's fine.
I think it's time. We've got to close. And I want to thank the panelists for your presentations. Thank you, Sara Zenaida Gold, for making this possible. And I am troubled as we close tonight with that comments about how is this impacting students. I'm thinking in particular of graduate students pursuing their PhDs, wanting to perhaps become professors like ourselves at the university level. And what we're sharing with you is real. I think we're all served by truth and by reality and good research and what we might bring to light in the process in the way of inequities and enduring ones, historic ones. But I think that hopefully what you've also gathered is the importance of struggle in community and with community. We could have told a deeper story. This is a long history of struggle precisely on these very specific issues that go back decades. And so my hope is that your takeaway will be that there is a refuge, if you will, in struggle, not only through the relationships and the bonds that we create, bonds of trust. We become, right, Alberto, we're all good friends now. We're in solidarity, and that matters so much. That's priceless, right? But beyond that, when you know that you're doing something good, not only for and in your current generation, but for the ones that are coming after you, just by modeling wet blades and ongoing research projects and policy briefs, we know we're making a difference, right? And you can't always measure it. It's not always a quantitative kind of outcome that's measurable, but it's certainly something that we know to be true, and that in the process we are fulfilled.
Let me add a couple of things. When Angela used the word struggle, it's exhausting and depressing to bring forward the details of how we've struggled on this. So I realize how strange it is, what we say and what we don't say. But just in my case, for example, I have a lawsuit right now in the federal court against UT Austin for retaliation because of how difficult it became for me to even try to complete my work in the Department of History. And UT has filed their final motion to dismiss, so we shall see if we get my day in court. I've made it this far. It's been almost 2 years of expenditures and work and patience and stress. And I'll give you another interesting thing. Just as I'm looking this little screen with this pseudo reality, what I have here is a virtual background. I really have a wall. So I think about these graduate students who are hoping that they'll get the job of a professor to someday have a swimming pool behind them. Of course, I have no swimming pool. I have no swimming pool. I've never lived in a building that apartment. I've never. It's interesting. I live in a 3-story building with no amenities whatsoever, no security guard, no buzzer, no elevator, no gates, nothing. And at the same time, I'm honored to be able to not just work at UT Austin and meet people like Emilio and Angela, but also to work on these issues that will in the long run hopefully will help many Hispanic people, even if they're not employed yet as professors. So we wish you all the best of luck.
And thank you, Sara, and thank you, MACRI, for having us. We really appreciate you making the time to allow us to speak to the public and to everybody that joined us out there. Thank you very much as well. We really appreciate you very much.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure to host you tonight and to learn about the great work that you're doing. Several people have commented to help pave the way for the next generation. Your work, it just reminded me of the work of people like George I. Sanchez, storied professor from UT Austin who also investigated discrimination and prejudices against Mexican Americans many years ago. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank our audience for joining us tonight. If you weren't able to catch all of tonight's talk, or you want to share it with friends or family, this video will remain online on our Facebook and YouTube pages for future viewing. I also want to thank our MACRI sponsors, such as the City of San Antonio, AARP, Wells Fargo, and individuals like those of you watching tonight who make our work possible. I hope you can join us next Thursday. We will have in 2 Thursdays. That's July 14th, 6 p.m. Central. We'll have a virtual talk, Epidemics, Public Health, and Mexican Americans, with Dr. Ana Martinez-Katzem from the University of Texas Permian Basin. You can always find out more information about our upcoming events, as well as learn about our vision for a national center dedicated to preserving and disseminating Mexican American civil rights history by visiting our website at www.somosmacri.org. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sara. Good night, everyone.